Hello and welcome back to my channel. So right now I'm currently having some time off of work, which is great because I'm able to make some new videos for this channel, for my art channel. So I'm very excited about that. And I thought that even though we are past the holidays now, we are past Christmas and perhaps past New Year's by the time I post this video, I wanted to share with you guys some of my favorite and some of my least favorite holiday horror movies. And the thing is, I was participating in a Christmas horror or holiday horror contest thanks to a Discord server I'm part of, so I owe them all the credit because a lot of these movies I would have never even known existed, and I wouldn't have found them by myself either. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's a bad thing. So I've compiled a little list here of the best and the worst Christmas horror / winter season horror that I watched this year. In general, I've watched the most Christmas horror ever this year compared to previous years. So I kind of want to start off with the worst. I have 3 categories here actually. The best, the worst, and the ugly. The ugly is a category of movies that are technically good but made me quite uncomfortable and disturbed while watching them, so we're gonna save that category for last to make things more interesting. So we're gonna start with the least bad of the worst. So the least bad was the Silent Night, Deadly Night franchise. This was actually pretty bad, but the reason I'm going to put it as least bad is because the first movie was a mediocre, kind of enjoyable watch. The second movie was boring up until a certain point in the movie where it started being absolutely hilarious. The third movie was terribad, and then the fourth one was actually not really a Silent Night, Deadly Night movie at all. It was a total different brand of movie. That part was interesting. So I'm going to give it a little bit of an edge for having a funny movie, a completely random movie akin to Halloween 3 where it doesn't have anything to do with the rest of the movies in the franchise, and then having a first movie that's kind of like a Friday the 13th, but not as good. The first one had its funny moments too, so I'm going to go ahead and give that one the least bad of the worst movies. I'm bunching them together because I couldn't be bothered to rank the franchise. None of the movies are good. None of them are good. They just have their own redeeming qualities to them. By the way, I'm going to try to avoid spoilers in this video as much as I can. The next least bad on my bad movies list is Jack Frost. So I didn't like this movie one bit, but again, I found it to be really funny at some points. There was a lot of points where I wasn't laughing when I was supposed to be, but then we get to some scenes at the end that were just hilarious. There was one scene in particular that bothered me that I didn't like at all, which I won't talk about because it's a spoiler. By the way, if you're thinking about watching this movie and you're worried about spoilers, let me just tell you it's probably not even worth it. This is not a very good movie at all, but I'm not going to spoil it for you just in case you still want to watch it. So Jack Frost, and no, we're not talking the Jack Frost that we all remember, that's more like a family movie. You've got to search up Jack Frost horror movie. Next we have Black Christmas 2019. Now this movie started out kind of interesting because it didn't follow the original too much. It was kind of going in its own direction, but it really flopped in the end for me, which caused me to dislike the movie overall. However, I still think it's kind of a worthwhile watch to see what they did with it, and I did enjoy like maybe the first half or so of the film. I enjoyed the actors, some of the actors were good in the movie. I just didn't think the movie came together very well in the end, but there were a couple of pretty cool kills in the beginning portion. Next we have The Ginger Dead Man, a movie that I did not know existed, but kind of reminds me of Child's Play. It actually seems like a direct copy of Child's Play, except instead of a doll we have an evil gingerbread man. This movie is easily the worst made, like the worst produced film out of all of these, but I have to give it an edge for just being so bad that you can't even comprehend how bad it is. And I think they were going for a funny vibe, kind of like Thanksgiving, but they didn't really have the budget to actually make the gingerbread man do cool things in the movie, so it just kind of flopped for me. But I have to admit I was entertained throughout the runtime, but it still wasn't funny enough to compensate for watching all of these stupid things that happened. There was like a romance plot that I didn't care about at all, because who cares about that in a movie titled The Ginger Dead Man? Now next we have our second worst movie, and that would be Black Christmas 2006. Nobody asked for this Black Christmas remake. I don't even understand why it was made. I mean, I understand because it came out in the era of bad remakes, and so this one was really disappointing for me. I have a video ranking the 3 Black Christmas movies where I explain and spoil why I disliked this one, but I really didn't think it was good because it was copying a lot directly from the original and over-explaining things, kind of like the Rob Zombie Halloween franchise did, which I wasn't a fan of either. Black Christmas 2006 lacks in scares and suspense and things like character development, so it wasn't an enjoyable watch for me. At least Black Christmas 2019 had some potential at the beginning, and I had some interest in it at first, but again, that one didn't turn out good either. But I preferred it to Black Christmas 2006. The only redeeming quality about 2006 was they had an all-star cast of early 2000s final girls. And finally, the very worst by far of any Christmas horror I've ever seen was Red Christmas. Now this movie was not just bad, but it was bad to the point of making me angry and uncomfortable. I did not enjoy 1 second of this movie. I also did not believe any of the family dynamic relationships between people in this movie. I didn't like the nature of the film, which was kind of honestly a mean film. It was a mean film. I almost want to put it on the ugly list, but the ugly list is full of good movies that are just very disturbing. And this movie wasn't even good. And I don't even think it was disturbing. It was almost offensive. It was just not something that I would recommend to anybody to watch, because no matter what, no matter who you are or what your beliefs are, the movie is probably going to piss you off, and it is not by any means a good Christmas movie at all. There were aspects to it that had to do with Christmas, but not really. Honestly, it was more of a political statement movie that was very strong in the statement that it was trying to make. I know Black Christmas 2019 is more of a political movie, but this one just takes things to a weird level. It's actually an Australian horror as well. I had somewhat high hopes for it going into it, and then from the second I started watching, I knew I was going to absolutely hate the movie, and all the way till the end credits, I did. If this is causing some of you guys to be interested in the movie, oh my gosh, I am so sorry, because most of you are probably going to hate it. I talked to a lot of other people on the Discord server that was participating in this contest, and they were watching the same movies too, and I think most people were pretty angry at Red Christmas, so it definitely is the worst Christmas movie, Christmas horror I've ever seen. And I'm just going to leave it at that. Now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and move on to the best Christmas horror movies. So I think the worst of the best that I have on this list is Santa's Sleigh. Now Santa's Sleigh is on this list because I find it to be hilarious between some of the bad acting, the things that don't make sense between the characters, the way that Santa himself is portrayed, and when you find out why there's this whole reign of terror going on in the first place. So this movie was entertaining, funny, and of course not the best of movies, but it somehow made my best movies list because I found it so entertaining and enjoyable to watch. So even though I don't think this is technically, on a technical aspect, a good movie, it has to make my best movies list. I watched it twice. I was actually expecting it to be super bad or something akin to Silent Night, Deadly Night, but I found it to be much more entertaining. Next, we've got A Christmas Horror Story, which I believe is a Canadian movie. Now, this one I was excited for because it was kind of like an anthology style movie, kind of like Trick or Treat perhaps, and I didn't really know what to expect of it because I had heard of it but never watched it before, and I actually enjoyed a couple of the stories in this movie a lot. There were a couple stories I didn't care too much for, but there were at least 2 really good ones in this movie. Now overall I wouldn't compare this to Trick or Treat, that was done way better, but still A Christmas Horror Story is a worthy watch if you have not seen it before. So I definitely enjoyed that one. And there were a couple stories, I don't want to spoil them, but there were a couple that I really liked. Next we have a French film called Deadly Games, and I didn't know of the existence of this film. It's also a foreign film, which just adds to probably why I never heard of it. But Deadly Games, without spoiling anything, is a lot like the movie Home Alone, except we have a killer Santa home invader who is not actually Santa Claus, but is dressed like Santa Claus. And we have a little boy who lives in a very big mansion who's home alone with his grandpa. This little boy luckily is very good with technical things and he's very handy. So kind of like the little boy in the original Home Alone, we get to see him figure out his way around this home invasion because his mom is trying to come home and is having trouble coming home. So I think this movie is really entertaining, and the funny thing is it actually came out before Home Alone as well. So even though it strikes a lot of similarities, it's by no means a Home Alone horror copy. It's a unique film in its own right, and I was pretty entertained watching it. I'd recommend it to anybody who likes Home Alone but who also likes horror. I also watched Home Alone this Christmas season as well because that's just a classic, but as I watched Home Alone I realized there were quite a few similarities between that one and Deadly Games, aside from the genres being completely different. Next on the list we have Krampus. This is 3rd place for the best. And Krampus is a movie that came out in 2015 that most of you've probably heard of or seen. It has some big actors in it, including Adam Scott and Toni Collette. I think a couple of other recognizable faces as well, and it's very enjoyable. It follows a little boy who kind of loses his Christmas spirit because of family issues, kind of like the beginning of Home Alone actually. It's a lot like that. I don't know what the similarities are with Home Alone and these horror movies, but there seems to be a theme here. But anyways, so the beginning kind of follows the family issues that you see the little boy going through in Home Alone, and then there's an unfortunate encounter with Krampus, who is kind of the opposite of Santa Claus. It's like a Christmas demon type of creature. And so I really like this movie. I recommend it to those of you guys who haven't seen it. It's scary, it's dark, but it's also just kind of funny and a little bit Christmassy as well. It's one of the more Christmassy movies on this list. Some of them just take place around Christmas, and I understand that we still categorize them as Christmas horror, but there are some that actually include Christmas characters in them or mythology, and those are very interesting. For 2nd place, we have Black Christmas 1974. Now I almost put this in 1st place, and I go back and forth between the two a lot, but I'll explain the reason why it's not in 1st place after I talk about what is in 1st place. So Black Christmas 1974 is a very scary, disturbing movie in my opinion. I think that even though it's a slow burn, like a lot of 70s horror, it builds up this tense atmosphere and these characters that we care about, and it's overall a great story. The ending is quite brutal, and it's just one of my favorite horror movies from the 70s. It's one that I only recently watched for the first time, and I just really have to praise it because it's such a great horror movie. Again, if you want to see me talk about the Black Christmas movies more, I have a whole video on that I posted as my last video, so go check that out. So last but not least, my favorite Christmas horror movie is Gremlins. It's taking the 1st place slot. Now originally I had this one beneath Black Christmas 74, which is because Black Christmas 74 is a scarier, more disturbing movie. However, when I'm ranking Christmas horror specifically, I think that Gremlins feels more like a Christmas movie. So now let's go ahead and talk about The Ugly. So The Ugly is a category of movies that I classify as good, but very mean-spirited and not very Christmassy at all. Okay, so for our ugly list, the least ugly film, I guess you could say, is The Children, which is a British film from, I believe, 2006, 2007, 2008. Now this movie goes very far. It is about a group of children experiencing strange symptoms of some kind of illness while on vacation at some kind of house that their families are all coming together to celebrate the new year. At first, not much happens. You have to get through the first bit of the movie and then the horror starts. Once it starts, there are some pretty intense and gory moments in this movie. It does feel a little bit mean-spirited at times, and so I'm including it in this ugliest list, even though it's not the most disturbing of the movies on this list. So the third ugliest film on this list is Better Watch Out, which came out in 2016, which follows a babysitter who encounters something strange happening, some kind of home invasion or something going on as she's babysitting this like 12-year-old or 13-year-old boy. And I'm not going to say any more because it would spoil that movie, but boy does this movie have some twists. I am putting it on this list because I find it to be a good movie, but upon the first watch, I was very, very angry after watching it. It definitely made me angry, like blood boiling angry, not as bad as Red Christmas, of course. So while this is technically a good movie, it's mean-spirited and dark. Now, I rewatched it again this year and I enjoyed it more on the second watch, which is good, probably because I knew what to expect this time around. So if you watched this movie and you hated it the first time, give it another watch. Maybe you'll like it a little bit more. Next on the ugly list, this is second place. So second place goes to The Lodge. The Lodge came out in 2019 and I can feel the influence from other movies like Hereditary perhaps. This is a pretty somber movie and it's almost like a slow burn art house movie, but it's not really that art house once you actually get to the end of it and figure out what's going on. This is another movie that pissed me off and had some twists that I was not expecting. I didn't like this movie as much as I thought I was going to. I was actually pretty nervous to watch it because I knew it was going to be kind of dark and maybe depressing. I think it is pretty depressing if I'm being honest. It's definitely not a joyful, fun holiday movie to watch. I mean, we're talking about horror movies here, but still it's one of the more dark horror movies, which is why I'm putting it on the ugly list. Now, this one was not as technically great as Better Watch Out was, so I'm only putting it higher up on the list because I found it to be more disturbing. But for the record, I enjoyed Better Watch Out and probably The Children more than The Lodge. The Lodge was just something else entirely. If you guys are going to talk about these movies in the comments down below, make sure you leave a spoiler warning because some of these movies cannot be spoiled or it will ruin the whole movie. Finally, last but not least, the highest up on the ugly movies list is Inside, which is a French horror, part of the French extremity movement, including other movies like Martyrs and I don't know what else. This movie was extremely violent and gory, which is just what I expected from it. I was not planning on watching it, then I just decided that I was going to. I was kind of convinced by some other Discord members, but it is by far the hardest to watch, okay, out of these movies. So it is hardly a Christmas movie also. Like, it is hardly a Christmas movie. It just takes place on Christmas Eve and follows a pregnant widow who is dealing with a home invasion. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about the movie. There was some really disturbing and disgusting gore and some extremely violent scenes, like worse than Tarantino violent. I didn't love the movie. I wanted there to be some more suspense because it started out being more suspenseful and then it kind of lost that as it went more into like the gore. Nevertheless, I think it was still a well-made film, but I don't think I would ever watch it again because it was really difficult to watch some of the scenes because of how disgusting they were. I wouldn't recommend this to you guys if you're faint of heart or anything like that because it is just not something that was easy to watch at all. And there were moments that I kind of just looked away because I was so disturbed by what I was looking at and grossed out. I just had to look away. But I know that these types of movies have cult followings, these French extremity movies. So if you're into that sort of thing, I think you would like the movie Inside. And there we have it, you guys. Those are my Christmas horror movie rankings. Of course, I missed some movies. I haven't seen all the holiday horror movies that were ever made, but out of the ones that I watched this year and that I've seen in the past, which overlap with the ones I watched this year, honestly, that was my rankings list of these movies. I'm curious to know your guys' thoughts. I also had an honorable mention, a movie called Dead End, which is really pushing it as far as being a Christmas movie. It takes place, I believe, before Christmas or on Christmas, but it has absolutely no references. I mean, there's a couple of holiday songs sung in the car. That's about it. The actual story is totally different. I actually really enjoyed Dead End. It has the lady in Insidious. What was her name? I'll pop it on the screen, I guess. It's about like a road trip. A family is driving up somewhere for the holidays and they get lost because of a detour. How many times have we seen that happen in horror movies? But what I really enjoyed about this is how the family dynamics played out as weird things started to happen, and that was the part of the movie that was the most enjoyable to watch. And it was just a lot better than what I thought it was going to be. So even though it's not much of a Christmas horror, it might be one of the least Christmas horrors on this list, I'm still going to give that one a shout out, and it's one of the ones that I'm glad I checked out. Alright, thank you so much for watching today's video. Again, leave any other Christmas horrors that you recommend or that you've seen in the comments down below. I will see you in the next video. Thanks again so much for watching. Bye!